I had been working here a lot. I
Yeah.
was working with a director who lives here and doing a lot of commuting. And my daughter and my son lived with me one summer when I was out here working. And my daughter just really loved it here. And she was going to start sophomore year of high school. And we decided it would be a really good idea for her to just fresh start, new school. And she got into an amazing school here.
Yeah.
So she and I moved here.
You were in Los Angeles before?
Yeah, in LA.
Well, that seems a little more conducive to the script writing life.
Well, it's all fine. The amount of times I actually go to a meeting where I have to be in LA a couple times a year, maybe.
Yeah.
It's really, even when I lived there, I never had to really be there. So.
Are you going in and pitching?
No, I haven't really pitched in a long time. But I have a meeting in a few weeks where I'm going to go in. They've read something I've written. People are interested. I'm going to go in with the director and the producer and just have a meeting with them. So I'm going to fly in for a few hours and then probably come right back.
Do you sit in a room with a couple of executives and basically walk them through your thinking?
Well, this is a relatively unusual project. It's long. I spent a long time on it. I wrote it on spec. So it's all there. It's a whole season of a show. So we're going to meet and have a conversation and, kind of discuss what I see for it and stuff. But for the most part, my work seems to, either come to me through someone or I could drum it up myself. And I rarely have to go into a room to try to sell it or myself.
Is that a result of just having been at it for as long as you have?
Yeah, I'm 57 years old. If people don't...
Yeah, it might be time to rethink your life.
I mean, it's hard, man. Going in and pitching is really a hard thing to do anyway. And I'm glad I managed to avoid it for the most part. I think I've pitched probably to try to get a job a couple times in my life, maybe on 2 projects where I've gone in and talked about something.
Yeah.
For the most part, I so hate that I've even started to talk about something and then just went off and wrote it for 9 months and then came back. I just don't like trying to sell myself.
What's difficult about it? Are they just ready to kind of pick it apart?
There's a whole stance when you're pitching. It's sort of, well, I'll do it for you, but since it's a podcast, we'll see. But imagine me.
You mean a physical stance?
There's a physical stance that the others in the room. My arms are folded. I'm leaning back in the chair. Everything about that attitude I don't like walking into
this. Is similar to every indie rock band I talk to.
Right.
When they play the shows, it's always like that front row of dudes just standing there with their arms crossed, win me over.
Well, the worst part when you go to a concert is industry crowd. Like if I ever get tickets to see a show through my agents and I'm sitting with a bunch of music industry people, they're always the worst audience, sitting there on their phones, talking to each other. Oh, I hate that. When you go in to pitch something, I just don't like that, I mean, you often have to talk about your work. You have to go in and talk about, like I'm going in a couple of weeks to talk about this thing that I've already written.
A series.
Yeah, and just going to have a conversation about it to just make sure that everyone's seeing the same thing. But that's different than going in to try to wow people about something. It's just not my skill. And I've often found that, selling an idea and writing something well are different skills. And I don't think they necessarily go hand in hand anyway. So, look, there are certain things, and I've talked about this before, about pitching that I've learned over the years, because I began as a pretty terrible pitcher. And now when I'm talking about pitching, I'm not talking about trying to sell my idea. Now I'm talking about just talking about something I care about. In a room, discussing something, let's say it's a meeting and it's about a rewrite of something or trying to express myself on something I really care about. I mean, there are ways to talk about stuff that are more successful than other ways. I'm not saying I don't have to go in and actually have conversations, because I do. So,
but I assume if you're really passionate about something, it's at least a little easier to try to sell it.
I've never found that to be the case. In fact, sometimes when I care even more deeply, I find I care so much that I get more self-conscious, because I don't want the fate of this thing I really believe in to, lie in my ability or inability to talk about it appropriately. But one of the things that I learned, I was working on a movie that, actually, ironically, I went in to go have a pitch about it. It was based on a book, and I went into the head of the studio to talk about what I planned to do. And it was only out to me. It wasn't like it was my idea that I was trying to sell. It was a book they gave me and said, "Are you interested?" And I went in to go talk about it. And the guy from the studio said, "I didn't understand a thing, but I read your script and different script. And I trust you can execute this, But ironically, so I wrote the script, got a director on it, and then we would have more meetings and we had to talk to other people, at the studio about the script. And I noticed that whenever I talked about it, it sounded terrible. And whenever he talked about it, it sounded great.
And he was doing a good job of conveying what it was?
Well, we're talking about the same thing. Why, when he went into a room, did it sound like a movie I'd want to see? And when I talked about it, it sounded abstruse.
But you felt like he was true to the source material.
Yeah, we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
And I said, "Can we go to lunch?" And I said, "What are you doing? How do you do that? Because it sounds great when you talk about it." And he gave me the best advice about pitching I ever got. What he said was, we all go into a room wanting to say what we think the other people in the room want to hear.
Yeah.
But you can never know what's actually going on in the mind of somebody else in the room. You are, however, the world's foremost authority on what you love about something. You are the world's premier expert on your take. If all you do is focus on what you love, focus on why you're drawn to this idea, focus on what excites you about writing it or directing it or whatever, that will lead the way because it's unassailable. Nobody can take that away from you. And I found, oh my God, it just opened the door up for me because I don't have to do what I felt was like a dog and pony show. I just have to say, oh, this is what I love about this. It's a different than passion. It's the truthful, whatever is truthfully drawing you to it, honestly drawing you to it. And it's kind of a no-lose because the truth is, if they're not going to like it, they're not going to like it. And if you pitch it and sell it as something it's not, they're not going to like what you write. So that was a big one. That really taught me a lot.
Once you have a couple of box office hits under your belt, do you get a little bit more leeway from the studio?
Yeah, you get, a certain benefit of the doubt for a while. But, you get older. And what I used to find was when I was a new writer, you could write worse scripts that had good things in them. And you would get the breaks would fall your way. But when you get older, you have to really deliver at a much higher level all the time. So
the expectations are just higher across the board.
And they aren't feeling like they're investing in you for the future. When you're young, everyone's trying to make their relationships.
You're not like the 19-year-old Dominican kid who's just entering the major league.
Yeah, exactly. And so he throws wild, but he throws fast, and they figure, get him in with a good pitching coach and teach him a breaking ball, and you know what I mean? It isn't that, and that's what it was like for the first couple of decades. And now I'm in this other part of my career. I'm doing more interesting work than I've ever done. I'm working with more interesting people than I've ever worked with. I have less angst about everything, but at the same time, there's always an awareness that if I don't really deliver at a really high level, the half-life for me is very short.
You've had scripts and films that were less successful, obviously, than others.
Most of them have been less successful than others, yeah.
Are there immediate ramifications from that?
People within the industry usually know what you were responsible for or not responsible for. Obviously, it's always better if you're associated with a hit. Even if for some reason you didn't have that much to do with why it was successful, it's obviously always better to be associated with it. But, I've had probably a half a dozen movies that I either haven't seen or only saw part of. And that's because
That I
wrote, or that I co-wrote or partially wrote or rewrote. But that's just because if I'm not the last writer on it, it kind of doesn't really feel like it's mine anyway. And there are a lot of those, or movies where I have a credit, but the director rewrote it. Or
is it painful in that case?
Yeah. But it's one of the bizarre skills needed to deal with this in a very rarefied way, because I know it's a good problem to have as a writer. Sure. Hey, my movie's getting made and I don't like it. I get it. It's, I don't feel sorry for myself about that, but you get, it hurts. You get hit really hard. So you have to deal with what's my relationship to that? What's my relationship to what other people perceive as failure and my name on it? And so for me, I just develop a kind of distance from the guy who has my credits on IMDb, because I know which ones I really care about. I know the ones I really wrote, or I wrote with a writing partner, like in Bill and Ted. Me and Chris Matheson wrote everything. I don't tend to put movie posters up in my house. I don't tend to associate myself with the movies that much. But so with other movies, I just kind of, my name's on it. There's a guy that wrote it who's got the same name as me, or at least wrote part of it, or worked on it for a few weeks. I mean, there are some movies which I worked on for a few weeks, and then I was like 7th of 9 writers or 3rd of 18 writers, you know, and I got a credit. Well, I can't really take credit for that, and I can't take blame for that. I just let that abstract idea of that other person with my same name take the hits, and I just try to focus on the work I'm doing.
You can't get too precious about it, because more so than just about any other art form I can think of, especially if you're not the person directing it and you're not super hands-on during the process, there's an expectation that regardless, for better or for worse, it's just going to be a different product than the one you put down on paper.
Yes, and I want to be really clear. There are some that I have been the final word on and even directed that haven't worked, and it's my fault because I thought something would work that didn't work. Or I really believed in the way something was happening, but people didn't connect with it. Audiences didn't connect, or critics didn't connect, or both. So it's not like everything that doesn't work isn't my fault. The painful stuff, it's a different kind of pain. When something that you really care about, and I've had a couple of movies like that where I really care about it, and they just don't work, that's a kind of deep, almost existential pain. And you hit the ground, and I've seen a lot of my friends just never recover from stuff like that. So that's one type of pain. And I think having a relationship with that pain and being able to not just step up again and keep going, but learn from it and optimize realistically, so you know what didn't work, why didn't it work, what am I going to do different next time, etc. And keeping the faith to keep going. I mean, that is one giant set of skills. The other one is the one we were talking about, which is, I didn't even really write it, and people hate it, and they hate me because of it. That's a different kind of pain. That's a sort of like, how do you just not feel shame? Yeah. How do you not, it's more of anger, like, damn it, you know, somebody messed it up, and I'm getting blamed for it. Again, that happens a lot, you know. So as a screenwriter, if I were starting again, I wouldn't even go into screenwriting. Not now in 2018. For sure I wouldn't. But even if I was starting back when I started in early 80s, you know, I would probably have had the courage I would have tried to have had the courage to do more of the writing that I think really reflects what you're actually writing. Theater, fiction, television, occasional movies. But I wouldn't have dived so deep into it.
What's so different about it now than it was when you started?
TV is a writer's-driven medium. There are so many markets, avenues, broadcasting systems. So
you would do screenplays, but you would do them for television.
I'm doing a screenplay right now. I'm doing 2 screenplays right now. One is with my friend Chris Matheson, and something we've been working on for a decade, which we're super close. We're almost ready to get going on, which is the 3rd Bill and Ted movie, which we always get up to the altar and they say, you may now kiss the bride, and then we lift the veil and it's just a rotting skeleton that falls into dust. But I think we're actually, it looks like we're going, so again, knock wood. And then another one with a director that I really like, I'm not allowed to talk about, but he's a brilliant director, so co-writing with him on a movie of his idea. So that's a good thing, because he's brilliant and it's interesting, and he thinks very differently than I think, and I'll be a better writer when I'm done than when I started, so that's always good. But in particular, I'm writing with the person who's going to direct it, so I know where it's going to end up, more or less. Other than that, last thing I did was the 10-hour thing I was telling you about. That is TV, where I'll be in charge. So I think there's something more invigorating about that, more life-affirming, noble. Not noble, that's probably the wrong word. It's more dignified as a writer. You're more ennobled, I guess, through the process.
Writing on spec has to be difficult because you go into it with the expectation that it just might never get made.
Every year of my life, I gamble all in on everything. Every year. I'm 57, as I said. I can honestly say I have never known where I'll be getting my check from in the next even 6 months or a year. I've never known. And when I say all in, I mean all in.
It sounds like you've done like script doctoring, things like that to some degree, right?
Yeah, I've done stuff where I've get paid for a short amount of time, and you can make some pretty good money doing that. You know, when you go in to fix up a script or punch it up or restructure it. But for the most part, what you're doing is you're taking a script that's like a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10, and you're making it 3 times as good. And everyone's like, wow, you made it 3 times as good.
It's a 6 now.
Exactly. It's a 6, which is still an F, you know, or a D minus. You know what I mean?
The foundation of the house is still wobbly.
The whole thing was misguided or whatever, or you didn't have the time to really. Point is, there are those jobs. Those are few and far between. And for the most part, I mean, I've done that a few times, but for the most part, I really try to take a job where I really think I can do something interesting. Do something that other people might not be able to do, or, you know, do something that only I could do maybe, or do something where I know I will be really challenged, or I'll be in that sweet spot, which to me is within my skill set, but outside my comfort zone, just outside the comfort zone, so that I'm always being pulled and challenged and always feeling like a little bit scared, but also intrigued and drawn into it. So like finding that. And so, you know, this thing Mosaic that I worked on for a few years was an incredible challenge. We were making up a form as we were going, but I had a great director I was working with. Couldn't have asked for a better creative experience. And I've written another thing in that form. You know, that's a big gamble because it's a form that doesn't quite exist yet. So when I say all in, I mean all in.
So there are some out there that, I mean, do you have any ones that you're particularly fond of that just never went anywhere?
I have some scripts that I really love. And they're very painful for different reasons that they didn't get made. Or most of the scripts that I've written that haven't been sold for a good reason, which is they're not good or they're almost good, you know, or...
Do you know that when you're in the middle of it?
No, you don't know it. You think it's good. And there's this feeling that you get when you finish something that makes you think it's great. But I've come to understand that that feeling is a trick. And it defeats a lot of writers because they think this thing is amazing, because it really feels good to transcribe your inner world and put it into the outer world.
When does it dawn on you that it wasn't a success?
Well, one of a few things happens. One is you plus time. You read it again a month later and you go, oh my God. But most of the time it happens in 2 ways. You give it to a group of friends and then you get feedback that you didn't quite want to hear. Or if it's a professional situation, you get called in for that meeting and notes meeting, and people are like, well, we like this, or or we think it's going to be good, and you're like, oh my God. And so what happens is you have a myriad of ways to deal with it. One is, and when I see this a lot, and I know that especially early in my career, I did this a lot, which is, you're wrong, this is stupid. And all that is it's a reaction to your own sense of shame, disappointment, insecurity.
And just being young. That's just part of being young.
It happens with older writers too. It happens, in fact, it destroys a lot of older writers because they get bitter and cynical and they think everyone around them is an idiot because it's so hard to actually look honestly at yourself, but even harder to look honestly at your work, at what you're producing, with objective eyes. So you have to figure out a way for yourself to hear criticism and have it be constructive. Because what you start to realize is if your script isn't working for people, it doesn't mean they're all idiots. It means something is wrong. Yeah. It doesn't mean what they're saying is wrong, and it doesn't mean you didn't have a great idea, and it doesn't mean the script won't be good. It just means that in this timeline of this ever mutating thing, which is a script in progress, it wasn't where you wanted it to be yet. Something about it isn't working, and you have to figure out how you will figure out what is worth listening to, what is not, what they're really talking about, what's going to really help this. And to me, that is almost the whole game of rewriting. It's really easy to hear notes and then try to fix them fast because we feel anxiety when we hear notes. And our brain, which is our big tool, goes into a panic mode and wants to, doesn't like living in not knowing space. So it wants to solve it fast. And so you want to just answer the notes really quick. But then that's why people get fired a lot, because they end up getting a rewrite, making it different, not understanding. I did their notes. Why is it not working? Well, it's because you can't expect people's notes to actually reflect what's really wrong. That's not their job, nor is it their ability. It's a very rare person who can tell you what's bugging them about something and why.
Especially when you've spent the amount of time that it takes to write a script or a novel. And granted, this is coming from somebody who works on the internet, so it's used to sort of instant gratification. But by the end of it, you're like, I pushed this baby out. The last thing in the world I want to deal with is like doing that all over again and having to sort of dive back into it. Like, I want to move on to the next thing.
Yeah, totally. And that's why, and I root for that in people because it keeps me working.
Yeah.
Because that's a big thing. 80% of the people, they fall away because they don't know when to quit writing or when to not quit writing. They don't, on a particular project, they can't figure out when something's actually done. More often than not, they think it's better than it is, because we all do. I do. Everyone does. When you finish something, you actually think this thing is great because, as I said, I think there's a chemical reaction that's happening in your body, making you actually think it.
It's the connecting of the dots and sort of the tying up of all the loose ends and realizing that you've solved all these problems at that point. It gives you a lot of like an endorphin rush.
It is. And it's a real high. But I've been doing this for a long time now, so I know that for me, getting it through to that stage is just a stage. You get some feedback, and then sometimes it's working better than you thought, and sometimes big swaths of it are working well. So then your job is, how do I isolate what's really the issues here? And for me, it's about listening for as long as you can listen and not letting your emotions overtake you. That seems to be the main issue with hearing notes, is emotion. Because you hear notes and then panic comes over you, or anxiety, or fear, or rage, or depression, or
all of the above.
Or all of the above. and those are all natural. And it's depressing because it's not what you wanted to hear. But so you have to figure out, how do I make each of these things work for me? How do I make anger work for me? How do I make fear work for me? How can I make disappointment work for me? And, I kind of have tried to train myself to be non-reactive emotionally when I hear notes, but rather listen, go away, try to figure out a way to, even if I can summon it, be grateful for the notes, under the theory that the script is just what it is at this point. It's not what I wished it would be. The reaction is not what I wanted it to be. The reaction is what the reaction is. So in a way, the notes are going to inform me how I can take this thing and make it something else now and keep it moving forward. It doesn't mean do everybody's notes. I got to be really, really clear about that. It means hear it, though. Hear it. Hear what they're saying, and then go away, and then resist the temptation to solve it all quickly, but actually try to live with it for a while and feel the notes, and not try to use your left brain, cleverness to fix it, but rather figure out how to truly look at your script now.
How much does working with a partner like, Chris, who I know you've worked with on a number of scripts, how much does that change the math?
It's wonderful when you're getting notes because you have somebody to bounce it off of. You have somebody to roll your eyes with, or, or get mad with, or, you got a partner, and that's always great in that way. It also, when you're trying to solve problems, it's not as deep a kind of process with a partner. You're not in the deep mulling state with a partner. It's a lot of talking back and forth. It's a different thing than going away and mulling. When I write on my own, I write from a different part of my body, I think, and brain than when I'm writing with a partner. Just because talking is different than not talking. Handwriting is different than typing. Writing on a wall is different than standing and writing.
Is one a more pleasurable experience than the other?
I think all are necessary.
Yeah.
At different stages, because I genuinely, and this is maybe a cockamamie theory, but I genuinely think that you write from all the different parts of your brain and your body. So I will, if I can do it, I will stand in a room with a giant whiteboard on the wall, and try and talk through a structure with somebody. I find it a very different process than typing the structure. I will never or I try never to read what I wrote in the same room where I wrote it or on the same device that I wrote it. I would never read a script on the computer I wrote the script on. It's a very bad idea because all the same cues go off in your head. I try to not read something in the same form, even if I can print it out. That's always better for me. Handwrite my first set of notes is always better. Sometimes it's better to handwrite an outline and then type an outline. And I find that each different modality activates different parts of the brain in different ways. If you've been having problems, like a lot of writers sit in one desk in one space and they're struggling, they're in a maze. It feels like they're in a labyrinth or a maze. I would say, get out of your space. Get out of your habits. Try a different way of manipulating the material. Try talking about it to somebody. Or try handwriting for a little while. Or if you're a handwriter, try typing. Or get a whiteboard and try writing it while standing up. Try typing while standing up. Get a standing desk for a while. It's actually fascinating how these little things can actually break through.
Is it getting out of your comfort zone?
No, it's about, it's important to get out of your comfort zone, but again, the right ratio of out of your comfort zone. But no, it's about not letting yourself succumb to the same mental patterns that you were in while you were writing it, which is the thing that got you into the mess, because it's like you can't fix a hammer with a broken hammer or whatever it is. You can't fix the broken hammer with the hammer itself. Yeah. We create these, I'm thinking, neural pathways of some kind when we're writing stories.
And is that influenced by external stimuli of just where you're sitting and what room you're in?
It all adds to it. Yeah. I read something once where someone was talking about how, because in Mosaic, which is one of the characters in Mosaic, which is this HBO thing that I was talking about, he's having all these images of himself committing a crime, and he can't remember anymore what really happened and didn't, and he doesn't know whether he's imagining these things because people have told him so many times, or if he's actually remembering. And what I was reading about was where if we tell ourselves certain stories over and over in our head, they become encoded like memory is encoded. And writing is just telling yourself stories. And so I think you start to encode those stories almost as memory. And so it becomes very hard to break out of that path when you're trying to understand what's working and not working.
That's why, like cemented as fact in your brain.
In your brain, it just feels like like it's of a whole. It's kind of hardwired now all of a sudden, like a circuit board that becomes a chip or something. And so talking about it can wake you from that dream state, or doing something different can just kind of open it up. I find, honestly, getting feedback is one of the best ways. Getting a handful of people to read something. They don't even sometimes have to respond to me. I can just, once I even just hand it to them, everything changes and I go, oh crap, I know what's wrong with it. I shouldn't have given it out because I know it's not working. But again, all of this, the meta point is truly, to me, writing is not about what happens on page 10 and on page 30 and on page 45. It's not about that. It's about developing a relationship with yourself and with the work you're creating so that you can objectively assess it, so that you can trust your emotions and use your emotions in a positive way, your excitement, your exuberance, your passion, your affection for something, and your so-called negative emotions, anger, fear. Again, for me, I was talking about using that. Depression can be really useful because you can really go to a place and go and get really, if you let yourself get really sad about how you're, let's say, like a movie that bombs or critics hate, if you allow yourself to truly feel sad about it, first of all, you're not holding it. You're feeling what you're supposed to feel, so it's the best way to move through it. But secondly, like with a script that just isn't working and you're like really bummed, there's something about that allows you to start to understand what you loved about it and didn't and why. And then if you allow yourself to get angry, that anger often allows you to break the molds that you've created for yourself with the script and like punch through some of the structure that's there.
The problem though is it's really easy to get stuck in depression. If you wade too deep into those waters, 100%. It's hard to get out.
And that's true, isn't it? Yeah, I agree. Well, again, more people fall off the path that way, which is they get the notes. It's fucking painful.
I feel like what you're getting at, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I feel like you're getting at is just sort of like be conscious of these emotions.
Feel them
be aware
consciously.
that you're experiencing them as you're experiencing them.
Feel them consciously. Don't avoid them. Lean into them.
Yeah.
Don't indulge yourself in them.
Lean but don't fall.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Lean but don't fall. Face them, and understand that they're just sensations like anything else. It's I don't want to get all new agey. I'm not really a new agey person, although I do.
You got a little bit of that in you.
Yeah. No, I mean I like to meditate.
Yeah.
I find that really helpful, but I don't believe in all woo-woo stuff. It's not. I like meditation because of its absolute practical, tactical application.
Yeah.
Which is life is better with it. So what is the drawback? You need less sleep. You can do better work. You're a nicer person. You're a more compassionate person. You're more present. Time moves slower. You have deeper access to stuff.
It makes me less anxious when I do it. That's the big thing for me.
Yeah. Me too.
I took I was on a long plane ride to China, and I was like, why am I not freaking out?
Right.
But I was fine because I could focus on my breathing. Everything I've sort of seen and heard and read about the first Bill and Ted movie leads me to believe that it was this, I don't know if happy accident is the right word, but really this kind of amazing fluke that happened. When something like that occurs, this totally out of left field thing, and it ends up being a hit that nobody expects, what lessons do you draw from that?
How lucky you are.
It's sort of one of those things. It's like that thing of being in a band and having a hit record. Part of you wants to try to
recreate that,
recreate that magic.
I've always felt that if I only had done one movie, Bill and Ted with Chris Matheson would have been the one I would have been glad to have done. Partly just because I think the message. There's stuff in the movie that I regret having put in there, actually, in hindsight, for sure. But for the most part,
to ask.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it, but for sure. But it's all everything, every piece of creative success, everything that you do is kind of a happy accident. It's about your ability to kind of see it as it's moving across your radar and grab onto it. We did this improv thing for years where we didn't record anything. We didn't have audiences. We just 5 of us in a room, like once a week. We used to just work out. I don't remember almost any of it because we did it for years, once a week. And Bill and Ted was just one thing that came up in one of those, and Chris and I held on to it, and we just started doing it as friends, just screwing around as Bill and Ted. And it's not like we were doing improv to get agents or showcase ourselves or anything like that. We were just doing it to push our creative selves, to make each other laugh and ourselves laugh.
One of you was Bill, one of you was Ted?
Yeah, but when in the sketch originally, but then when we were doing it, we would just do it randomly. Neither of us was specific. We were
they're not like manifestations of Okay.
No. Because in the sketch, I was Ted and he was Bill, but for the literally 2 years of just screwing around as Bill and Ted, we were interchangeable as it. And sometimes when we were writing it, we would write the dialogue and then just go, Bill, Ted, Bill. And now, now that we're writing them as middle-aged men, they've got more definitive personalities, and Alex and Keanu have embodied the characters, and it's really a partnership with Alex and Keanu now. It's not me and Chris, and hasn't been me and Chris for decades. We have a true sense that this is Bill, this is Ted, but when we first were writing them, they were 2 halves of one brain, and it was almost no distinction between them.
Why have you been banging your head for a decade trying to come out with a third film? Like, what keeps bringing you back to it?
The banging of the head has not been us.
No, but I guess a better way of putting it is, in spite of the banging of heads,
why are we staying with it? We always said we're not going to dip into that well unless we have something that we really want to say. And same with Alex and Keanu. They didn't want to play the parts just to play the parts. This is the opposite of a money grab for us. I've never made very much money on Bill and Ted. I haven't seen a penny from any merchandising of it. Our first deal, I think we were paid $5,000 to option the first movie and $15,000 to rewrite it, and then that was split, and we had to split that.
Yeah,
and we made almost no money. I've never seen any royalties from it or anything like that. A little bit of residuals, but not much. And this movie will be the same. It's not about making money. It's about putting these guys out in the world again, and it's something I want to see. I would really like to see these guys inhabit those characters again. We have had all these meetings with Alex and Keanu where we're throwing ideas around starting 10 years ago. And they don't do Bill and Ted. And then there was one moment where Chris and I where the guys just became Bill and Ted briefly. And Chris and I were like, oh my God, we just got to see some Bill and Ted, just ourselves. It was amazing. It's because I think there's a spirit to them that I really love. And mostly for me, and I realize I'm setting the bar really high for myself here, but mostly for me, the fans of Bill and Ted, of any movie I've ever been involved with, and this is like Men in Black or any other movies that I've written that have had sequels, none have the fan base like Bill and Ted, even though it wasn't as worldwide a popular movie. And I just feel like the Bill and Ted fans are like family in a way. One never knows whether a movie will work or not, and you work as hard as you can. You work as hard on the bad ones as you do on the good ones, and you try to make everything as good as you can make it, and sometimes the chemistry just works and sometimes it doesn't. So who knows, right, if this movie will ultimately be what we hope it is. But I know the intention is there to make it that. And I think the team is great. The director is great. Dean Pariseau, who did Galaxy Quest. Stephen Soderbergh is a producer on it. Alex and Keanu, we have, assembled the same cast. Yeah. We've worked hard on the script. We just really want to get it out there for the people who really want it, and make it at a budget that doesn't put the onus on it having to be some giant worldwide smash and therefore fulfill tick certain boxes. We wanted to make it about what we wanted to make it about. I hope that it'll be funny for people. I mean, it's funny. We laughed a lot writing it, so that's always a good sign. But we're older, and Bill and Ted are older, and so it's about that. And I hope, it's about that, and it's about joy, and it's about finding joy, and it's about whatever their essential Bill and Tedness is. It's about them finding it. I mean, it's a really joyful movie, actually. I'm making it sound like it's kind of sad, but there is a sadness in it too.
You're talking about the first one or the new one?
The new one.
Okay.
The new one, yeah.
Because
the first movie is just light. The second one's dark. And I think the second one is dark, and it reflects kind of both where Chris and I were at that time and where Alex and Keanu were at that time. In particular, Chris and I, in our friendship at that time.
I saw that. I was young when I saw that movie, and there were things in that movie that freaked the shit out of me. The hell stuff in particular really stuck with me.
It got really freaky in the third act. It was like all their worst fears came back to get them. They were initially the antagonists of the third act. The third act we never got right as writers. We screwed up that movie. It's 2/3 I think really works, and then a third we blew. We just couldn't get the script right.
Excellent adventure, from what I could tell, was like people loved it right off the bat. The second one, in recent years, or the past like couple of decades, I think has grown in people's estimations. It was one of those things that wasn't what people were expecting, and that in and of itself was sort of enough to make people write it off.
Well, there was a lot of pressure for us to do a rehash of the first movie. Bill and Ted go into fiction. Initially, it was like, what different historical, what's their next history test?
It would have been the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, basically.
Yeah. And we were like, we were like, no. And then, well, what if they go into fiction?
Yeah.
And they go into literature, and we're like, it's the same movie. And then I think it was Chris who said, what if we just kill him? And we're like, what if we just do that? And Alex and Keanu, thankfully, got on board with it.
Yeah.
Because
the studio must have loved that.
They were not thrilled. But that was the only movie that Alex and Keanu were willing to do, which was, we're not going to do a typical sequel. Yeah. We're just going to, And I think, had we had more time, I think we could have gotten the script right. It was a pretty rushed experience from beginning to end. Even the shooting of it was rushed. We started shooting in January, and I think we released it in June. It was crazy. So had we had a little more time, I think we could have made the whole movie coalesce a little better, but we didn't. And I think it suffered a little bit because of that. But the first movie was actually eviscerated by critics, just brutally. And then the second movie was pretty well received by critics. By critics, fans were the flip.
This is the sorts of things that get lost in time.
Yeah, it held up better than in time. You would think it seemed to have grown, which is really a great thing. I'm deeply, deeply, deeply grateful for that because there is a spirit to it that I appreciate, and I love those characters, and it was really heartbreaking to see how it was eviscerated by critics. People weren't even letting their good critics review it either. It was like the their third and fourth tier critics just, now they have a chance to go in the ring and just beat the shit out of a movie, and they did. And
there is, as somebody who does criticism, there is something satisfying in just ripping something to shreds, as awful as it's.
Yeah, but it's actually not a bad movie. I watched it. I hadn't watched the movie since it came out, and then I had to watch it to do the Blu-ray, and I was like, I was really pleasantly surprised. Steve Herrick did a wonderful job with it, and it's fairly sweet, and as I said, there's some stuff in it I wish we didn't put in. But
working on this third one, is there a sense that you just kind of want to tie up the bow on that story, or is there this notion that this is just something that's kind of always going to be with you, and that if and when the opportunity does present itself, that you can always go back there?
I think this is probably going to be the last Bill and Ted movie with Alex and Keanu. One of the difficulties we've had getting this movie made is the people who own the underlying material have had a lot of interest to do Bill and Ted reboots, new teenagers, etc. And we have had to battle against that. I mean, there was a script that was written at one point where I didn't read it, but I think, it was new Bill and Ted, and I think they used a cell phone or something instead of a phone booth. I don't know. That's what somebody told me, but again, I didn't read it.
How do they fit all those people in there?
It's a very big case.
It's very tall.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of the S's or whatever you call it. No, the plus. That's it.
Oh, okay. It's one of these guys.
Yeah, one of yours. Yeah,
Galaxy Note. Yeah.
No. So that was always a battle we were having, but I think this is the last one with Alex and Keanu, because it's about. That's what it's about. It's about it's them looking at their life.
The actors are going to have to play their age. How old did you say you were? You told me at the beginning.
57.
I mean, how much of a reflection of your age is?
Well, the characters are 50.
Yeah.
And again, it's really light. It's absurd and light, and it's ridiculous. I mean, it really is ridiculous.
There's something bittersweet though in like. Every time, even the best of these circumstances, when you are revisiting characters much later, there's always a sense of bittersweetness of the lives that have passed since then. Yeah, well, they were told when they were teenagers that they were going to be the greatest people who ever lived, and they're going to write a song that was going to save the world. And what if that didn't happen? What would you do? How would you rectify it? What if you were still trying? And that's sort of where we meet them. We laughed a ton writing it, and we tried to make a movie about that burden and about the joy of finding yourself again be as funny and ridiculous as we could make it. And I hope that works. The first movie, when we wrote it, we were in our early 20s, and we were just cracking each other up at the most ridiculous stuff with no sense of anything about mortality or our time on the planet. It was just we're in our early 20s and we're going to live forever, and we even joked to each other, if we ever write Bill and Ted at 30, that would be so lame. I know. And I mean, honestly, getting to dive back into those characters decades later was such a thrill. It was so thrilling. And when Chris and I started doing it, it was like, this is really a great, great, great privilege we have. Even if nothing happens with this, that we're getting to interact with these characters in this way again just meant a lot to us. But I hope we do get the movie out there. It looks like we will. So, and if that's the case, I hope it lives up to people's expectations. Certainly my expectations. We won't be for lack of trying if it doesn't. But I feel really good about where it is right now. There you go, the screenwriter Ed Solomon. You can find him over at ed_Solomon over on Twitter. Since we recorded that conversation, a lot of news has come out about Bill and Ted 3. Extremely excited to see that. Thanks so much to him for taking the time to do that. Thanks to you guys, as always, for listening to the program. If you like the show, there are a number of ways to support us. You can rate and review us on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or on Spotify now. Find us on YouTube, anywhere where you get podcasts. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Tumblr. That's RIYLcast.tumblr.com. That's the first and best place to get all of your RIYL related information. If you have any feedback, it's RIYLcast@gmail.com. And that's about it for this week. So stick around, because we are going to be back at just about this time next week with another episode of RIYL.